Title page text. Contents, list added by transcriber, list of plates Claude Lovat-Fraser by John Drinkwater. Note on the scene and costumes. Cast of characters. Act I. Scene I, Peacham's house. Airs 1-18. Act 2. Scene I, a tavern near Newgate. Airs 19-24. Scene 2, Newgate. Airs 25-38. Scene 3, the same. Air XXXIX. Act 3. Scene I, Newgate. Airs XLXLI. Scene 2, a gaming house. Air XLII. Scene 3, Peacham's Lock. Airs XLV. Scene 4, Newgate. Airs XLVI. Scene V, the Condemned Hold. Airs 57-67. To J.G. and to G.L.F., without whom I should have been powerless, do I dedicate my share in this book. C.L.F. Note, the text here given is taken from the edition of 1765. The scenes have been renumbered in the modern method, denoting actual changes of place or intervals of time. First published September 1921. New impression October 1921. List of the plates. I. The Beggar frontispiece. 2. Immerse, Peacham to face. Page 6. 3. Polly Peacham 18. 4. Scene, a tavern near Newgate. 28. V. Captain Macheath 40. 6. Lucy Lockett 56. 7. Peacham 70. 8. Lockett 82. Claude Lovat-Fraser. That when I die this word may stand for me. He had a heart to praise, an eye to see, and beauty was his king. Dead at the age of 31 after a sudden operation, Claude Lovat-Fraser was as surely a victim of the war as though he had fallen in action. He was full of vigor for his work, but shellshock had left him with a heart that could not stand a strain of this kind, and all his own fine courage could not help the surgeons in a losing fight. We are not sorry for him. We learn that, not to be sorry for the dead. But for ourselves? This terror is always so fresh, so unexampled. I had telephoned to him to ask whether he would help me in a certain theatrical enterprise. I was told by his servant that he was ill, but one hears these things so often that one gave but little thought to it beyond sending a telegram asking for news, and now this. Personal griefs are of no public interest, but here is as sad a public loss as has befallen us, if the world can measure truly, in our generation. But it is not, I think, of our loss that we should speak now. These desolations, strangely, have a way of bringing their own fortitude. A few hours after hearing, without any warning, of Lovat-Fraser's death, I was walking among the English landscape that he loved so well, and I felt there how poor and inadequate a thing death really was, how little to be feared. This apparent intention to destroy a life and genius so young, so admirable, and so rich in promise, seemed, for all the hurt, in some way wholly to have failed. We all knew that, given health, the next 10 years would show a splendid volume of work from the new power and understanding to which he had been coming in these later days. But just as it seems to me not the occasion to lament our own loss, so does it seem idle to speculate with regret upon what art may have lost by this sudden stroke. It is, rather, well to be glad that so few years have borne so abundantly. Not only is the work that Lovat-Fraser has left full in volume, it is decisive in character beyond all likelihood in one of his years. Greatly as he would have added to our delight, and wider as his influence would have grown, nothing he might have done could have added to our knowledge of the kind of distinction that was his and that will always mark his fame. The man himself had a charm of unusual definition. One might go to his studio at 5 o'clock and find him lumbering with his great frame among a chaos of the rare and curious books that he loved, stacked pell-mell onto the shelves, littered on tables and the floor, his clothes and face and fingers streaked with paint. And then an hour or two later he would come dressed ready for the theater, an immaculate beau of the 50s, his top coat with waist and skirts, his opera hat made to special order by a Bond Street expert on an 1850 last. And then, before setting off, he would talk of some fellow artist who was a little down and out, and wonder whether some of his drawings might not be bought at a few guineas apiece. Then to book, as it were, such an order gave salt to his evening, and if the evening meant contact with some of his own exquisite work, a word of admiration was taken with that wistful gratitude that it is now almost unbearable to remember. The theater is a complex, cooperative affair, and it is idle to inquire who gives more than another to it. But on one side of its effort nobody in these later years has fought for light and beauty more surely and courageously than Claude Lovat-Fraser. Like every fine artist, he was sometimes a little puzzled, a little hurt, that the critics could not see the clear motives inspiring his work. But the purpose never faltered. As You Like It, the Beggar's Opera, if the exquisite designs for Madame Karsavina's later ballets, these made it plain enough that a new genius of extraordinary power and fertility was at work on the stage. With a knowledge of tradition that combined the widest learning with profound intuition, Lovat-Fraser in his design touched the life of 500 years with the English spirit of our own time, with a certainty that every one of his colleagues, I know, will be proud to allow was beyond them all. The fertility of which I speak was perhaps his peculiar distinction, and it had no touch of common facility. He could not draw a line that was not hard with thought and rooted in imaginative decision. But he could invent with immense rapidity. It was the old, though rare, story. Alike in his theater design and his tender landscape, beauty of spirit flowed in everything he did into beauty of execution. He was a man in whose presence everything mean or slipshod withered. But perhaps it is most fitting at this time that we should think of our dead friend in yet another way. We are governed by two influences, our own character and example. For each man his own character is for his meditation apart, but of example we may sometimes speak together in the open with profit. Those of us who live always striving towards creative effort believe passionately that the thing towards which we aim makes for all that is most chivalrous and most intelligent in life, that it is indeed the one true honesty in the world. And yet we know how easily that effort is beset by fears and jealousies and failure in generosity, how lightly we who should together give all our energy to the service of our art, wasted in little concerns of spite and self-interest. And it is in just such ways as this that great example may serve us nobly, and there is surely never lived an artist in whom such example more clearly shone. Art, which for him embraced and crystallized all that was brave and adventurous and tender, was the worship of Lovat-Fraser's life, a worship which he kept with an absolute loyalty. It is my privilege to know most of the best artists, in all kinds, of my age. One has this distinction, another that. But I think that he had the loveliest of them all. I have known nobody who brought to his art a devotion so pure and utterly removed from self-interest. If he could serve the beauty that he loved, he was eager always to do so with perfect indifference to his own reward. Nobody could be with him for 10 minutes without feeling that art was a thing far greater than any artist. He had the lovely, humorous humility that is the one sure sign of greatness. One felt always that if he should think that another might do given work better than he, there could be for him nothing but distress if the best was not done, even though it meant the loss of personal opportunity. But it is one of the happy things of genius that this exquisite humility can only live with great creative gifts, so that Lovat-Fraser knew from day to day the supreme joy of mastery. The humility, however, is our example, and the thought that seems most worthy today is that he stands at this moment, for all he was younger than most of us, as a challenging leader to us all. It will, I think, always be impossible to remember him without feeling that anything mean or grudging in the spirit in which we do our work is a betrayal and an intolerable thing. With all his gaiety, his fun, his simplicities, and his powers, he showed us not only what a fine artist can do but what a fine artist can be. And under his leadership at this moment may we not go back to our work in the world with renewed courage and faith. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For his fame none of us have any fear. There is in his public achievement and his portfolios a solid body of work that more and more must establish itself. However futile prophecy in these things must be, one is confident that 100 years hence his name will be highly honored among the little band who helped to bring back some life and truth to the English theatre of this age. He would wish for nothing better than that. And idle though it is to ask what his death, at little more than youth, may mean in the way of loss to the art that he lived for, his friends know that as dear a life as any of our time has gone suddenly, inexplicably, taking with it the tenderest love of everyone who knew him. And he leaves with us an example without any stain. John Drinkwater. London, Midsummer 1921. The Beggar's Opera. Note on the scene and costumes at the Lyric Theatre. Hammersmith. Superficially, the task of staging the Beggar's Opera was one of supreme ease. Indeed, so easy was it that it became a matter of some embarrassment to prune and select the required amount of data. Here was Hogarth in his actual scene of Newgate with Macheath in chains. Here was Laroon's Cries of London Falling, in its edition of 1733, pat into the period. Here was the National Portrait Gallery, and, added to these, here was the benefit of all Mr. Charles E. Pierce's research. 1. After a month or two of work and designing, the ease became so marked and apparent that it engendered in me the beginnings of mistrust. Still, I persevered in scene and costume with historically accurate reproduction and, until 3 weeks before the actual work was due to be carried out at the costumiers and in the painting shops, I felt comparatively cheerful. Then I reviewed my forces, the little scale models of the scenes, the characters in painted cardboard, all exact and accurate. Something was wrong and the result was, I confess, appalling. I had not made allowances either for my theatre or for my audience. I had forgotten that it required a spacious Georgian theatre, the intimacy of the sideboxes, the great personages sitting on the stage. The Duke of Bolton, Major Pauncefoot, and Sir Robert Fagg were not in their places as in Hogarth's painting. The pit would not be filled with tie-wigs and hoops, and there would be a sharper line of division between the actors and the spectators than ever existed in 1728. Something else had to be done. As reproduction was a failure, one would try to give an impression of the same thing. Impressionism proved even worse than accuracy. It was neither one thing nor the other. It merged into making a picture of it, a crime that is without parallel in the staging of a play. To make a pretty picture at the expense of drama is merely to pander to the veracity of the costumier and scene painter. What was then to be done? Added to all these objections was the important fact that I had designed scenes that would have seriously hampered the resources at Hammersmith. The theatre would have required more space for storage than could possibly have been given, and, in addition, an army of stagehands would be wanted for whom there was not in this little theatre the accommodation. The solution was, of course, to forget one's past work, to scrap the models, and to start feverishly afresh. The only method left untried was the symbolic. That is to say, to hint at the 18th century and to suggest that through the doors on the stage existed the London of 1728. The scene demanded to be simple and one which, with slight modifications in doors and windows, remained before the audience for the whole action of the play. It was, therefore, to be a scene of which people did not easily tire and that remained interesting, unobtrusive, and formally neat. To find such a scene it is necessary to refer back to days when the comic and the tragic scenes were architectural and permanent. This I did, and, taking Palladio's magnificent scene at Vicenza, by a shameless process of reductio ad absurdum, evolved the scene that is now in use at Hammersmith. Palladio and Gay have much to forgive. So far the scene, but it called for a corresponding treatment in the dresses. In the Beggar's Opera no one is in the height of fashion. Macheath and certain ladies of the town alone keep company with lords and gentlemen, and even then there must have been apparent a distinction. Macheath is unaltered. Here it was essential to keep to tradition. Macheath in a blue coat is unthinkable. The rest of the characters are frankly in the neighborhood of Newgate. The clothes of Peacham and Lockett would be as equally unfashionable and just as possible 30 years before as 30 years after 1728, whilst the footpads are clad in whatever Georgian rags that happen to come their way. With the women I have taken greater license. I have kept faithfully to the outlines of the age, the close-fitting bodice, the flat hoops, the square-toed shoes, but I have taken considerable liberties in the manner in which I have shorn them of ribbons and laces, and, for the sake of dramatic simplicity, be it remembered, I have eliminated yards of trimming. Just so much explanation is, I consider, due to the public, but whether I have been justified by results or whether, under the sacred mask of drama, I have erred unpardonably, are points which, so long as this revival draws attention to a forgotten masterpiece, can be of no very great importance. See Lovat Fraser. Chelsea, February 1921. 1. Polly Peachum and the Beggar's Opera, by Charles E. Pierce. Messrs. Stanley Paul and Company, 1913. Dramatis Personae. Men. Mr. Peachum Lock Kit Macheath Filch. Jemmy Twitcher Crookfingered Jack What Dreary Robin of Bagshot Nimming Ned Harry Paddington Mat of the Mint. Macheetha's Gang. Ben Budge. Beggar Player. Women. Mrs. Peachum Polly Peachum Lucy Lock Kit Diana Trapes. Mrs. Coaxer Dolly Troll Mrs. Vixen Betty Doxy Jenny Diver Mrs. Slammikin Sucky Tawdry. Women of the Town. Molly Brazen. Constables, Drawers, Turnkey, etc. Introduction. Beggar, Player. Beggar. If poverty be a title to poetry, I am sure nobody can dispute mine. I own myself of the company of beggars, and I make one at their weekly festivals at St. Giles's. I have a small yearly salary for my catches, and am welcome to a dinner there whenever I please, which is more than most poets can say. Player. As we live by the Muses, it is but gratitude in us to encourage poetical merit wherever we find it. The Muses, contrary to all other ladies, pay no distinction to dress, and never partially mistake the pertness of embroidery for wit, nor the modesty of want for dullness. Be the author who he will, we push his play as far as it will go. So, though you are in want, I wish you success heartily. Beggar. This piece I own was originally writ for the celebrating the marriage of James Chaunter and Moll Lay, two most excellent ballad singers. I have introduced the similes that are in all your celebrated operas, the swallow, the moth, the bee, the ship, the flower, and sea. Besides, I have a prison scene, which the ladies always reckon charmingly pathetic. As to the parts, I have observed such a nice impartiality to our two ladies, that it is impossible for either of them to take offense. I hope I may be forgiven, that I have not made my opera throughout unnatural, like those in vogue, for I have no recitative, excepting this, as I have consented to have neither prologue nor epilogue, it must be allowed an opera in all its forms. The piece indeed hath been heretofore frequently represented by ourselves in our great room at St. Giles's, so that I cannot too often acknowledge your charity in bringing it now on the stage. Player. But I see it is time for us to withdraw, the actors are preparing to begin. Play away the overture. Exeunt. Overture. Act I, Scene I. Scene, Peachum's house. Peachum sitting at a table with a large book of accounts before him. Air I. An old woman clothed in grey, N.C. MIDI PDF. Through all the employments of life each neighbor abuses his brother, whore and rogue they call husband and wife, all professions berogue one another, the priest calls the lawyer a cheat, the lawyer benaves the divine, and the statesman, because he's so great, thinks his trade as honest as mine. A lawyer is an honest employment, so is mine. Like me too he acts in a double capacity, both against rogues and 4M, for 'tis but fitting that we should protect and encourage cheats, since we live by them. Enter Filch. Filch. Sir, Black Moll hath sent word her trial comes on in the afternoon, and she hopes you will order matters so as to bring her off. Peachum. As the wench is very active and industrious, you may satisfy her that I'll soften the evidence. Filch. Tom Gag, sir, is found guilty. Peachum. A lazy dog. When I took him the time before, I told him what he would come to if he did not mend his hand. This is death without reprieve. I may venture to book him rights. For Tom Gag, £40. Let Betty Sly know that I'll save her from transportation, for I can get more by her staying in England. Filch. Betty hath brought more goods into our lot to year than any 5 of the gang, and in truth, 'tis a pity to lose so good a customer. Peachum. If none of the gang take her off, she may, in the common course of business, live a 12-month longer. I love to let women scape. A good sportsman always lets the hen partridges fly, because the breed of the game depends upon them. Besides, here the law allows us no reward, there is nothing to be got by the death of women except our wives. Filch. Without dispute, she is a fine woman. 'Twas to her I was obliged for my education, and, to say a bold word, she hath trained up more young fellows to the business than the gaming table. Peachum. Truly, Filch, thy observation is right. We and the surgeons are more beholden to women than all the professions besides. Heir 2. The Bonnie Grey Wide Morn, N.C. MIDI PDF. Filch. 'Tis woman that seduces all mankind, by her we first were taught the wheedling arts, her very eyes can cheat, when most she's kind, she tricks us of our money with our hearts. For her, like wolves by night we roam for prey, and practice every fraud to bribe her charms, for suits of love, like law, are won by pay, and beauty must be feed into our arms. Peachum. But make haste to Newgate, boy, and let my friends know what I intend, for I love to make them easy one way or other. Filch. When a gentleman is long kept in suspense, penitence may break his spirit ever after. Besides, certainty gives a man a good air upon his trial, and makes him risk another without fear or scruple. But I'll away, for 'tis a pleasure to be the messenger of comfort to friends in affliction. Exit Filch. Peachum. But 'tis now high time to look about me for a decent execution against next sessions. I hate a lazy rogue, by whom one can get nothing till he is hanged. A register of the gang, reading. Crook-fingered Jack. A year and a half in the service, let me see how much the stock owes to his industry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gold watches, and 7 silver ones. A mighty clean-handed fellow. 16 snuff boxes, 5 of them of true gold. 6 dozen of handkerchiefs, for silver-hilted swords, half a dozen of shirts, 3 tie periwigs, and a piece of broadcloth. Considering these are only the fruits of his leisure hours, I don't know a prettier fellow, for no man alive hath a more engaging presence of mind upon the road. What dreary, alias Brown Will, an irregular dog, who hath an underhand way of disposing of his goods. I'll try him only for a sessions or 2 longer upon his good behavior. Harry Paddington, a poor petty larceny rascal, without the least genius, that fellow, though he were to live these 6 months, will never come to the gallows with any credit. Slippery Sam, he goes off the next sessions, for the villain hath the impudence to have views of following his trade as a tailor, which he calls an honest employment. Matt of the Mint, listed not above a month ago, a promising sturdy fellow, and diligent in his way, somewhat too bold and hasty, and may raise good contributions on the public, if he does not cut himself short by murder. Tom Tipple, a guzzling soaking sot, who is always too drunk to stand himself, or to make others stand. A cart is absolutely necessary for him. Robin of Bagshot, alias Gorgon, alias Bluff Bob, alias Carbuncle, alias Bob Booty. Enter Mrs. Peachum. Mrs. Peachum. What of Bob Booty, husband? I hope nothing bad hath betided him. You know, my dear, he's a favorite customer of mine. 'Twas he made me a present of this ring. Peachum. I have set his name down on the black list, that's all, my dear. He spends his life among women, and as soon as his money is gone, one or other of the ladies will hang him for the reward, and there's £40 lost to us forever. Mrs. Peachum. You know, my dear, I never meddle in matters of death, I always leave those affairs to you. Women indeed are bitter bad judges in these cases, for they are so partial to the brave that they think every man handsome who is going to the camp or the gallows. Air 3. Cold and raw, N.C. MIDI PDF. If any wench Venus's girdle wear, though she be never so ugly, lilies and roses will quickly appear, and her face look wandraw smugly. Beneath the left ear so fit but a cord, a rope so charming as own is. The youth in his cart hath the air of a lord, and we cry, there dies an Adonis. But really, husband, you should not be too hard-hearted, for you never had a finer, braver set of men than at present. We have not had a murder among them all, these 7 months. And truly, my dear, that is a great blessing. Peachum. What a dickens is the woman always a whimpering about murder for? No gentleman is ever looked upon the worse for killing a man in his own defense, and if business cannot be carried on without it, what would you have a gentleman do? Mrs. Peachum. If I am in the wrong, my dear, you must excuse me, for no body can help the frailty of an over-scrupulous conscience. Peachum. Murder is as fashionable a crime as a man can be guilty of. How many fine gentlemen have we in Newgate every year, purely upon that article? If they have wherewithal to persuade the jury to bring it in manslaughter, what are they the worse for it? So, my dear, have done upon this subject. Was Captain Macheath here this morning, for the banknotes he left with you last week? Mrs. Peachum. Yes, my dear, and though the bank hath stopped payment, he was so cheerful and so agreeable. Sure there is not a finer gentleman upon the road than the captain. If he comes from Bagshot at any reasonable hour, he hath promised to make one this evening with Polly and me, and Bob Booty at a party of quadrille. Pray, my dear, is the captain rich? Peachum. The captain keeps too good company ever to grow rich. Marybone and the chocolate houses are his undoing. The man that proposes to get money by play should have the education of a fine gentleman, and be trained up to it from his youth. Mrs. Peachum. Really, I am sorry upon Polly's account the captain hath not more discretion. What business hath he to keep company with lords and gentlemen? He should leave them to prey upon one another. Peachum. Upon Polly's account. What, a plague, does the woman mean, upon Polly's account? Mrs. Peachum. Captain Macheath is very fond of the girl. Peachum. And what then? Mrs. Peachum. If I have any skill in the ways of women, I am sure Polly thinks him a very pretty man. Peachum. And what then? You would not be so mad to have the wench marry him. Gamesters and highwaymen are generally very good to their whores, but they are very devils to their wives. Mrs. Peachum. But if Polly should be in love, how should we help her, or how can she help herself? Poor girl, I am in the utmost concern about her. Air 4. Why is your faithful slave disdained? And C. MIDI PDF. If love the virgin's heart invade, how, like a moth, the simple maid still plays about the flame. If soon she be not made a wife, her honors singed, and then for life, she's what I dare not name. Peachum. Look ye, wife. A handsome wench in our way of business is as profitable as at the bar of a temple coffeehouse, who looks upon it as her livelihood to grant every liberty but one. You see, I would indulge the girl as far as prudently we can. In anything but marriage. After that, my dear, how shall we be safe? Are we not then in her husband's power? For a husband hath the absolute power over all a wife's secrets but her own. If the girl had the discretion of a court lady, who can have a dozen young fellows at her ear without complying with one, I should not matter it, but Polly is tinder, and a spark will at once set her on a flame. Married. If the wench does not know her own profit, sure she knows her own pleasure better than to make herself a property. My daughter to me should be, like a court lady to a minister of state, a key to the whole gang. Married. If the affair is not already done, I'll terrify her from it, by the example of our neighbors. Mrs. Peachum. Mayhap, my dear, you may injure the girl. She loves to imitate the fine ladies, and she may only allow the captain liberties in the view of interest. Peachum. But 'tis your duty, my dear, to warn the girl against her ruin, and to instruct her how to make the most of her beauty. I'll go to her this moment, and sift her. In the meantime, wife, rip out the coronets and marks of these dozen of cambric handkerchiefs, for I can dispose of them this afternoon to a chap in the city. Exit Peachum. Mrs. Peachum. Never was a man more out of the way in an argument than my husband. Why must our Polly, forsooth, differ from her sex, and love only her husband? And why must Polly's marriage, contrary to all observations, make her the less followed by other men? All men are thieves in love, and like a woman the better for being another's property. Air V. Of all the simple things we do, and see. MIDI PDF. A maid is like the golden ore, which hath guineas intrinsical int, whose worth is never known before it is tried and impressed in the mint. A wife's like a guinea in gold, stamped with the name of her spouse, now here, now there, is bought, or is sold, and is current in every house. Enter Filch. Mrs. Peachum. Come hither, Filch. I am as fond of this child, as though my mind misgave me he were my own. He hath as fine a hand at picking a pocket as a woman, and is as nimble-fingered as a juggler. If an unlucky session does not cut the rope of thy life, I pronounce, boy, thou wilt be a great man in history. Where was your post last night, my boy? Filch. I plied at the opera, madam, and considering 'twas neither dark nor rainy, so that there was no great hurry in getting chairs and coaches, made a tolerable hand on't. These 7 handkerchiefs, madam. Mrs. Peachum. Colored ones, I see. They are of sure sale from our warehouse at Redriff among the seamen. Filch. And this snuff-box. Mrs. Peachum. Set in gold. A pretty encouragement this to a young beginner. Filch. I had a fair tug at a charming gold watch. Pox take the tailors for making the fobs so deep and narrow. It stuck by the way, and I was forked to make my escape under a coach. Really, madam, I fear I shall be cut off in the flower of my youth, so that every now and then, since I was pumped, I have thoughts of taking up and going to sea. Mrs. Peachum. You should go to Hockley in the Hole, and to Marybone, child, to learn valor. These are the schools that have bred so many brave men. I thought, boy, by this time, thou hadst lost fear as well as shame. Poor lad! How little does he know as yet of the Old Bailey! For the first fact I'll ensure thee from being hanged, and going to sea, Filch, will come time enough upon a sentence of transportation. But now, since you have nothing better to do, Evan, go to your book, and learn your catechism, for really a man makes but an ill figure in the ordinary's paper, who cannot give a satisfactory answer to his questions. But, hark you, my lad. Don't tell me a lie, for you know I hate a liar. Do you know of anything that hath passed between Captain Macheath and our Polly? Filch. I beg you, madam, don't ask me, for I must either tell a lie to you or to Miss Polly, for I promised her I would not tell. Mrs. Peachum. But when the honor of our family is concerned. Filch. I shall lead a sad life with Miss Polly, if ever she comes to know that I told you. Besides, I would not willingly forfeit my own honor by betraying anybody. Mrs. Peachum. Yonder comes my husband and Polly. Come, Filch, you shall go with me into my own room, and tell me the whole story. I'll give thee a glass of a most delicious cordial that I keep for my own drinking. Exeunt. Enter Peachum, Polly. Polly. I know as well as any of the fine ladies how to make the most of myself and of my man too. A woman knows how to be mercenary, though she hath never been in a court or at an assembly. We have it in our natures, Papa. If I allow Captain Macheath some trifling liberties, I have this watch and other visible marks of his favor to shew for it. A girl who cannot grant some things, and refuse what is most material, will make but a poor hand of her beauty, and soon be thrown upon the common. Air 6. What shall I do to shew how much I love her, and see? MIDI PDF.